Hi everyone! Welcome to this video on getting started with the Syncfusion Pivot Grid in a Blazor server application. Pivot tables are used to display summarized business data in a table format. In this video, I'll explain how to create a Blazor server app and install the Syncfusion Blazor package in the app. Then I will explain how to add the Syncfusion Blazor Pivot Table component with the required fields to the application. After creating the pivot table, I will add prominent features to it like a grouping bar, filtering, format, and a field list. Now, let me proceed to create the Blazor project first. I can create a Blazor application either using Visual Studio 2019 or Visual Studio Code. In this video, I'll create a server-side Blazor application using the Visual Studio 2019. Make sure that you've installed .NET Core SDK 3.1.2 or later versions. To follow along with this video, one should have a basic understanding of C#, HTML, and CSS. Also, you can watch a descriptive video regarding Blazor and Syncfusion controls with the title, Create a Blazor Server App and Add Syncfusion Blazor Components, which you'll find in a card in the top right corner of this video. Using Visual Studio 2019, I create a new project. I select the template, Blazor App, provide the project name as My Blazor Server App, and click Create. Here, the Blazor Server App was selected by default. Hence, I proceed by clicking the Create button. Now Visual Studio has generated a Blazor server application. To use the Syncfusion Blazor Pivot Table component, I need to install the Syncfusion Blazor NuGet package into my application. For that, I will open the NuGet Package Manager by right-clicking the project file and selecting Manage NuGet Packages. Under the Browse tab, I will search for the Syncfusion Blazor package. I select it and click the Install button. The installation has been completed now, and you can check it under the Dependencies folder and within the Packages folder. You can see the Syncfusion Blazor package added to this application. Next, I will register Syncfusion Blazor service in the services container. For that, I open the startup.cs file and use the Syncfusion Blazor namespace. Within the Configure Services method, I will make a call to the Add Syncfusion Blazor method. This makes Syncfusion Blazor services available within the application. Next, I will register a valid Syncfusion license key. To do so, in the Configure method, I call the Syncfusion Licensing Syncfusion License Provider class. Static method, register license. You need to pass your Syncfusion license key as a string parameter in the register license method. I have done this off screen. Within the Pages folder, open the host.cshtml file. Within the head tag, I need to add the required CSS file to render the Syncfusion Blazor components. In this example, I refer to the CSS file from the installed Syncfusion Blazor package. Now let me add the Syncfusion Blazor pivot table in the index.razor page. To do so, I use the Syncfusion Blazor pivot view namespace. Adding this namespace here will allow me to use the pivot table component markup in the index.razor page. Also, I can import the namespace in the imports.razor page to make it available in all Razor pages within the application. Before creating the pivot table, let me create its data source first. For that, in the index.razor file, I will create a data source in C#. Since this is a Razor file, I use the @code directive. I create the public class product details and add properties named sold, amount, country, products, year, and quarter with their respective types. I create a public list of product details variable named data source. I create a public stat method named getProductData that returns to the list of product details. Within the getProductData method, I add items to the data source list object. I override the onInitialized method, which will be called when the component is initialized, and within it, I set this data source object with the product details.getProductData method, which returns a list of product details. Now I add the sfPivotView tag. Within it, I add the PivotViewDataSource setting tag and set the data source property with the @DataSource object that we created just before. Since the data source property is of generic type, I need to provide the type of the data source object to the pivot table. To do so, in the sfPivotView tag, I set the property tValue and assign the type as product details. Now the pivot table can understand its data source type as product details. I set the height and the width for the pivot table. I save the file and run the application. You can see the pivot table rendered without any data. Let me add a report to this pivot table. I can display data in the pivot table with 4 major axes using the PivotView Data Source Setting class. They are PivotView Rows, a collection of fields that need to be displayed in the row axis of the pivot table; PivotView Columns, a collection of fields that need to be displayed in the column axis of the pivot table; PivotView Values, a collection of fields that need to be displayed in aggregated numeric values in the pivot table; and PivotView Filters, a collection of fields that filter the data bound in the row, column, and value axes of the pivot table. You can add fields from the data source to filter axes that are not visible in the pivot table. Now, within the PivotView Data Source Settings tag, I add the PivotView Columns tag, and within it, I can add many columns. In this example, I will add 2 columns. I add the PivotView Column tag and add a name property, and set the value year. Here, the year is the field name from the data source. In the same way, I add the field quarter as second column. Next, I add the PivotView Rows tag, and within it, I add a PivotView Row tag, and set the name property with country. In the same way, I add the field products to the row. Let me now add the PivotView Values tag. Within it, I add the PivotView Value tag, and the name property, and assign the value sold. Additionally, I set the caption property as sold units for clarity. I add another PivotView Value tag, add the name property, assign the value amount, and set the caption as total amount. I save the file and run the application. You can now see the pivot table rendered with data. The columns contain the fields year and quarter. The rows contain the fields country and products, and the values contain the fields sold and amount, with the captions sold units and total amount, respectively. By default, the aggregation for the value fields will be of type sum. You can change it using the property type. Let's find out the maximum sold amount using the max type in the amount column. In the amount value field, let me add the property type and set the value summary types max. There are 22 summary types in total available in the pivot table. You can use them as per your application's needs. Let me remove the sold field to make this clearer. I save the file and run the application. You can see the pivot table with the maximum values for each item. Here, in the fiscal year 2015, the maximum value shown in the grand total is 235,612. This value is from the United States, which is greater than the France and Germany road totals. If I expand the United States, I will find that road bikes has the maximum sold amount over mountain bikes in the United States. Next, I will move on to the fourth and final part of this video, adding important features to the Blazor Pivot Table. The Pivot Table component has a powerful set of features, including GroupingBar, filtering, formatting, field list, and many more. I will now explain some of these features. First, let me explain how to enable the GroupingBar in the Pivot Table. The GroupingBar automatically populates fields from the bound data source and allows end users to drag fields between different axes such as columns, rows, values, and filters to alter the pivot table at runtime. It also provides the option to sort and remove fields. To enable the GroupingBar, in the sfPivotView tag, add the property showGroupingBar and set the value to true. Let me change the type of the amount value field to sum. I add the field sold in the value axis again. I save the file and run the application. And in the pivot table, you can see the GroupingBar with the configured fields and their respective axes. Notice all the fields contain a filter icon, and I can filter the fields using that. Here, I click the Country Filter button. It shows the filter dialog with the search text box and a list of values and checkboxes. You can either type in the search box or use the checkboxes to filter items. I clear the item France and click OK. You can see the filter icon is updated with a different color, indicating a filter is applied to it. I can also use this filter panel to filter all the fields in the pivot table, that is columns, rows, and value axes. You can use this filters panel when you do not need to show the members in the pivot table, but still need to filter them. From the row fields, let me drag and drop the product field to the filters panel. Now you can see in the rows that only country details are shown. Now in the products field, I can click the filter button. Clear the item mountain bikes and click OK. Now you can see the pivot table shows values of road bikes and doesn't show mountain bikes. Now let me show you how to achieve the same effect through code. In the Pivot Table Data Source Settings tag, I add the Pivot View Filters tag, and within it, I add one Pivot View Filter tag, add a name property, and set the value as products. I will remove this products field from the row axis so that the products field members will not be visible in the pivot table. I set the file and run the application. In the pivot table grouping bar, you can see in the filters panel the added products field with the filter button. Next, I will show you how to format values in the pivot table. Only the fields in the value section that are numeric data values are applicable for formatting. In this example, I will show you how to display a currency pattern for the amount value field. Within the Pivot View Data Source Settings tag, I add the tag Pivot View Format Settings. Since I'm going to add formatting for one field, within it I add one Pivot View Format Setting tag and set the name property to amount and set the format property with the value C, which denotes the currency pattern. I save the field and run the application. And in the pivot table, you can see the amount field values are formatted in the currency pattern with the default currency symbol, the $sign. Next, I will explain how to show a field list in the pivot table. The field list allows us to add fields, or remove fields, and to rearrange fields between different axes, including the column, row, value, and filter axes. It also allows us to filter and sort options on each field dynamically at runtime. To enable the field list, in the SF Pivot View tag, add the property Show Field List and set its value to true. I save the field and run the application. And in the pivot table, at the top right corner, you can see the Field List button. Clicking on it shows the built-in Field List dialog. The field list provides an option to add new fields to the pivot table from the data source. This is the advantage of the field list over the grouping bar. If you need more information about the Blazor Pivot Table component, you can refer to our online documentation. A link is provided in the description for this video. Finally, let's summarize the main points that I've explained during this video. I've explained the steps to create a Blazor server app project and import the Syncfusion Blazor assemblies. Then I explained how to add a Blazor Pivot Table component to the application, along with a few important features. You can download a fully featured example from the link provided in this video's description. If you found this video useful, be sure to click the like button and subscribe to our channel so that you'll get notifications about new videos. Thanks for watching.